So
Oh,
it's a
well,
good idea.
yeah, I was watching some videos of that historian you like, Schneider, the one that wrote the cartoon on fascism. He was parents were Quakers. I think that explains the lunatic side.
Hmm.
Comparison: Trump's America to the 1930s fascist Germany.
That's the video you shared on Facebook.
Yeah. I just took a picture of the video. I thought, Schneider's face in that. He just looks so crazy. Looks wild-eyed.
I don't recognize who it is.
That's that historian you're talking about in the last meeting of Millennium and Macrocosm, which is very popular with a lot of people. Uh,
Yeah, well, until you give me a name, I don't know. I may not know him anyway. It doesn't look familiar at all.
he was the one that did the comic about these signs of fascism or something like that, or the
Snyder, Timothy Snyder.
yeah, Tim
Well, I
Snyder.
never knew
That's
what he looked like, but okay.
you have to watch the video, I reckon. He's just so wild-eyed and crazy in that, and
I don't recall ever saying I particularly liked that comic.
there's a few people I think, or maybe not you.
I remember, yeah, there was a good turnout for that meeting. Yeah. Yeah, the Timothy Snyder book. Yeah. But I never knew what he looked like.
I think he's a bit way out with a lot of stuff. Uh, so when they compare, why is fascism bad, Professor?
Yeah. Yeah.
How to fight fascism in America? On tyranny, right? That was the book, wasn't it? It was cartoonized.
On tyranny, you're right. Yeah. Well, you've heard me say this before. The conversation is too muddled and confused to be productive.
Which conversation is that? The politics or anything like that?
The grand conversation, fill in the blank. Well, the problem, you've heard me say this before, the problem is just nobody defines their terms. We all assume we know what each other is talking about. But if you say things like democracy or fascism or even God or religion, or, you say those English words, then you just make the assumption we know what each other is talking about, but we don't. Your definition of God is different from my definition. Your definition of democracy is different from my definition. So we're never going to have any conversation because we just don't know what each other is talking about.
Well, you know what the failure is there. Just
Nobody's ever going to have the patience to sit down and say, okay, well, first of all, let's define what our words are. Does anybody
you,
ever do that? No, no one's ever going to sit down and actually have that
what you're
conversation.
talking about is what you'd term a deeper conversation. It's people spending a lot more time in conversation like they did in the drawing rooms of the 19th century.
And that's why it's always going to be a waste of time, just because you never get anywhere. People talk past each other. We've talked about this before. It's just people who just want to be heard. They just want to talk just for the sake of being heard. And then actual communication is not on the menu.
Oh, okay, that'd be Phil.
Yeah.
just trying to advertise his presence. I deeply felt need to be noticed.
They're not actually interested in getting to, an actual understanding. They just want to be heard.
Yeah, I was, oddly enough, I came up with right. Yeah, I would say what the Western world is suffering now is something terminal in, wait for it, 2 words, public discourse. It's gone out the window. I was talking to a Dutch lady yesterday. She was quite a virulent Trump hater. And I said, well, following what Aristotle and Plato and all that said, this is the course that the democracy takes. Uh, Democracies are materialistic. Democracy is something that's closer to the greatest good for the greatest number, in theory. And everyone wants to exercise their appetites. The Spartan society is the heroic, and they would term the Spartan society as being more spiritual than democracy because they constrain the appetites. They think appetites are a source of weakness. But us Athenians living in our democracy just love an appetite. And yeah, I was watching this philosopher who was in the Austin group talk about this from the Aristotle's summation of different types of political systems. That the democracies are very much about appetites and the greatest good for the biggest appetite, and they succeed. Athens was quite successful as a material entity. But what happens over time is the democracy starts off and it's kicked off from a previous culture, usually an aristocratic. And in an aristocratic society, people know their place. And it's encouraged that they should be all for one and one for all. And democracy starts with that social attitude, so it's very successful at the start, but eventually people become so concerned with their personal appetites that it becomes every bugger for themselves, or I'm all right, Jack. And once the democracy has reached this stage of deterioration where the vast majority aren't concerned, they expect society's just there to serve their appetites. There's Kierkegaard as well, which he said the vast majority of people are just there to pleasure their own belly buttons. They're not willing to think about issues of greater responsibility or direction in a society. And eventually, yep, the democracy, as we're seeing, the consumer society, we live in a society which has become so absorbed in the appetites. And eventually this leads to the democracy failing, the failure of public discourse because everybody's off in their own belly button. And then you get the tyrant. Well, hi guys, a tyrant has appeared. And this is the mistake they're making. They think this is an aberration. But if Aristotle is right, Donald will be just one of many tyrants, although at the moment he's more constrained by there's still democracy there. For example, if Donald got too out of hand, he'd be overturned by his own party. But, and this is the thing, a lack of public discourse, a lot of crazy ideas going around, and you end up, the positive with the tyrant is he does do some things, like Donald put his foot down. It's only 2 sexes. And then there's the issue of China, which the wasn't really being faced up to, but Donald was quite willing to have a go at China and just about everybody else. I would say Donald's plan is, for example, if he created a trade embargo, okay, what would Americans miss out on? Fripperies, which they've probably got enough fripperies to tide themselves over for a while. But what the Chinese would lose out on is the American dollars to buy the stuff they really need, imports of oil, food. So the consequence of a trade embargo would be much more telling for China than America. And that would probably cause a collapse of the Communist Party in China and North Korea. And if Donald got that, then this is interesting. He could really take up the issue of Russia. Russia would suddenly lose a lot of support and would be probably seriously interested in doing a deal. So is that a ex-Greek finance minister was talking about the issue. He said that a huge mistake, well, he personally hates Donald like anything, but he said the huge mistake they're making is they think the guy's dumb. He said the guy's actually very clever, very manipulative. And he said at the moment his own lot, the left, is running around like headless chickens because they just can't understand what's happened. They're seeing what's happening out there and their mentally just cannot process it. His name again, Greek finance minister, or ex-Greek finance minister. Did I write that down somewhere? But in short, what they don't realise is that tyranny is the future fate of Western civilization because the public discourse has self-destructed. You know, I mean, you need a sensible public discourse. And I used to be a lefty, and I can understand what I see in the left is a lot of fanaticism, which doesn't involve carefully going over the issues. It's a sort of a pie in the sky sort of doctrine. And I used to be it. Okay, there it is. Okay, Yanis Varoufakis on a show called Unapologetic. The West is collapsing under its own lies. Yeah, people, I'm worried about the way they bandy around the word fascism because where it differs is Mussolini and Hitler had private armies. Donald Trump has made the mistake of not having a private army, so he's not reading the book that well. There's stuff like the Proud Boys, but they're just kids dressed up thinking they're doing something, and they have their limitations.
See this from The Simpsons?
Yeah, but yeah, public discourse. So you're probably in agreement with that issue, aren't you? Oh, okay, there we go. We want what's worse for everyone. We're just plain evil. Democratic convention inside. We hate life and ourselves. We can't govern. What I'm seeing is that the countries which were the most socialist, you might say, it's pretty much the European nations, Canada and now Australia, are getting into bad financial straits because, you know, you can have public largesse, and the West has been keeping itself going by borrowing money from the developing world. It used to produce its own wealth. And, you know, America in Donald Duck's time was the world's powerful engine of creation. And then they got a bit slack. Easy riders. The time of slackness arose, just looking for an easy ride. And then when the Reagan era, they learnt the new trick of borrowing money to keep themselves afloat. But I think that angle, borrowing money from the developing world, is running out now. That's why they're in trouble. So Canada's going down the tube, Europe's going down the tube. I think Australia will be going down the tube soon.
Against humanity that
I don't know if you're familiar with Yanis. Don't agree with everything he says, but his opinion's a bit interesting. Very popular. But yeah, everybody's looking for an easy ride now, you know, sort of. No, I was like that. When I had a more socialist attitude, I thought, well, you know, I'd just like, you know, an easy life delivered on a tray in front of the hotel room door. Well, it's not too bad an idea, except it doesn't work once you've got too many people that want the easy ride. A serious element where people don't want to work is a product of a lack of sociability. It's the workplace has become that unsociable. So, you know, basically years ago, you'd go to a workplace and people were nicer, but now They're all stabbing each other in the back. Well, this is something you complained about when you tried to get out and about a bit. You found people to be backstabbers. And it's true, people are, I don't know, people are always, well, I think even the Donald Duck comics illustrate that there was a nasty side to people, but it was more measured. Back in Duck's day, they could be nasty and nice, but it was more intelligent. Today, they're nasty and dumb. They're hitting the jackpot. This is years in development. It's people also don't understand their own limitations. It's and people are living on the idea that somehow science and technology is going to come up with stuff to solve all their problems. And I noted about 20 years ago what's obvious is the growth of science and technology is slowed down enormously. There's a huge, you go from say about 1850 to 1950, that was a huge leap. And today you don't quite see the same anymore. There are growth in certain fields. Uh, it's pretty much slowed down. And if they're thinking, well, they'd need something like a fusion power or something like that. But I think they're just being taken to the cleaners on that one. You get these companies saying, oh, yep, we've made a bit of advancement and I'll spend the next 50 years using it as a meal ticket. And it's with a lot of stuff these days. Everyone's looking for a meal ticket. Except back in the 1930s and in Donald Duck, they were more honest about it. They just looked at the facts. This is a thing. You look at Donald Duck, and what's the mentality you pick up? This was a culture which more often called a spade a spade. Like I said, it's a culture that's starting to, and I'm seeing it now. It's sort of a culture that I was almost born to, and yet it's becoming remote now. So discourse is the big word, and public discourse. Yeah, I think what it is you get somebody like Phil, and although he's intelligent in a way, he's also a bit of a simpleton. He doesn't realise that the big world out there is a bit bigger and more complex than he imagines. And so there's a word they use, shit it in, that you just throw the bowling ball out there and it's going to, strike the pins. Because the world's only a small place, it's that tiny that the bowling ball's going to have to go to the right spot, but they don't understand. The world, if you start looking into it, the world is complex. People are complex. There's a lot of issues. Now, this is Karl Barth. This is virtually what he said, that, when you've trooped around for a while, you start to find that people are a lot screwier than we model them in our head. They can be into strange stuff and really odd angles. But that's a wisdom he had from his era that seems lost on a lot of people. They got the idea that one size will fit all. That's what's been taught in the schools. It's like in Australia, we used to have, some people didn't do too well in high school, as we call it. So they had what were called technical schools, and they were schools that were really pretty much teaching, a lot of mechanics and stuff like that. And so you got a lot of tradesmen who were qualified in the technical schools, but the white collar crowd didn't like them, so they got rid of them. And a lot of people just can't sit in a high school class. If you give them something mechanical to do, they can enjoy it. They can do that. And it gives them something. Yep. Intelligent public discourse has gone to the dogs, and yet they all think they're pretty smart. Yeah, fascism. I had a bit of a look, and they made that. Rick made that quote that fascism and sort of Bolshevism or Marxism came off the same tree, and that's true. But you can just read that in history. That's Mussolini. He was originally a communist. And when he saw in World War One that the workers of the world didn't unite, that nationalism was the greater draw, which had been uh, attacked as a concept by Marxism, he switched it. Fascism, in a sense, is Marxism remodeled. But there's complications that there were two people running around in Europe World War One onwards that were either the Bolsheviks, Marxists, or the fascists which had arisen to oppose them. You got people who were not interested in socialism at all. Fascists were socialists, and so were the Marxists. But the people who didn't like socialism, like the aristocrats, the big factory owners and all that, decided fascism was the lesser of the two evils. And this is why you've got the complicated elements in fascism, that you've got people who at heart weren't really fascists, but they were afraid of the Bolsheviks. That comes out in Cabaret show with Liza Minnelli. You ever seen that?
No, but I know what it is.
You know the story.
Yeah.
Well, they had the rich guy in it who befriended them, was running the Nazi party, and the other guy was warning him, look at them, do you think these guys can be controlled? And the guy said, oh no, the Nazis, they're the answers to the communists, and I'm more afraid of the communists. The guy said, what's going to happen when these guys get power? But it's interesting, yeah, Rick makes that point, and it's quite true. The two systems of totalitarianism, they're both socialist, and they came from the same tree. And the reason I don't like the fascists is I know it's doomed to failure, as all socialism is. That's the one reason I don't like the fascists, because I know down the track, it'll be just the same old nepotism, and it'll just come apart one day. Whatever they call it, capitalism or democracy had a fairly long capitalist democracy had a fairly long good track record, but maybe that's going today as well. So is there any philosophers talking about the wonders of modern discourse? I suppose that'd be your old favourite, Kenneth again. He might have made a mention. We've gone from an era where people might spend 2 hours of the day talking about stuff to an era where they just watch the media. As the term for TVs when I was a kid, I don't know if it was used in America, the idiot box, because what was on it was idiot, and what watched it was idiot. It's amazing. I remember when I was a little kid and TVs weren't that new. They looked really weird. You'd see a family watching TV, and it was new. It was strange. Jesse eyes like that, you know, just everyone's Popeyes watching TV. Oh, well, we can bring this theme up with Rick, see what he says. Public discourse. Discourse in general, conversation, looking at the complexities